In the last lessons, we learned about solubility rules and we learned about soluble compounds and insoluble compounds. Well, in this lesson, we are going to look at the solubility rules more specifically. Well, by definition, solubility rules determine if a compound will dissolve in water or remain as a solid. Now, this is how you use the rule. Well, first of all, any compound with any of the ions below, so here I have a list of ions below here, will always be soluble. What does that mean? Well, any compound that you see with nitrate in it, or with acetate, or any ions from group 1A, they are always soluble, no exception. If we look at nitrate, for example, if I look at this, how about calcium nitrate, NO3, 2, that is soluble. So any compound with the nitrate is soluble. The same thing with acetate. Let's look at this. Any compound with the acetate ions will always be soluble. For example, let's look at this. Let's make up this compound right here. We have AlC2H3O2, and there are 3 of it. Because the acetate is in this compound, it makes this compound soluble. What about group 1A? Well, any compound with the ions from group 1A will always be soluble. For example, let's look at this one right here. We have, how about this? We could have sodium Na2CO3. You see that sodium right there? It makes this compound soluble. Now let's look at the second rules. Any compound with any of the ions below, with a few exceptions, okay, will always be soluble. For sulfate, the exception is when sulfate with barium, calcium, or strontium would not be soluble. It would be insoluble. Now, what about, let's look at an example where it is soluble. What about this? Aluminum sulfate would be Al2SO4, and there are 3 of the sulfate. See that sulfate right there? And aluminum is not one of the exceptions, therefore it is soluble. But if we look at barium, BaSO4, now this one is insoluble. What about ammonium? Well, ammonium is always soluble and it doesn't have any exception. For example, we can look at ammonium NH4OH or ammonium hydroxide, that is soluble. So any compound with ammonium ions in it, it will be soluble. Then we have group 7A, which including fluoride, chloride, and bromide. Now, there is an exception. That is when it's bonding with lead, mercury, and silver. It will be insoluble, but with anything else it will be soluble. For example, if we have calcium chloride, that is soluble. But if I have Pb or lead chloride, this is not soluble. You see how that works? You see how the exception works? Okay? Or what if I have silver chloride? This would not be soluble. It would be insoluble as well. Now, if you have any compound that is not described, by the solubility rules, more likely that compound is insoluble. And that's how you apply the solubility rules, including with the exception.